This is episode 3 in our Prolapse series, talking all about navigating pregnancy and birth with a prolapse. Enjoy!
Hey mama, I'm sending you wonderful pregnancy vibes. It's time for you to guide you through. Let's take some time for you. It's pregnancy with Physio Laura.
Hello, mamas, and welcome back to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast. We are on episode 3 of our 5-part Prolapse series today. So remember, if you haven't already, you need to go check out episode 1 and 2 before you listen to today's episode, because it really is all put in a logical order for this Prolapse series. So we've already covered the ins and outs on exactly what a prolapse is, what you would feel, the symptoms you might have, plus also the main treatment pillars that you need to know about. So definitely go check those out before we jump into today's episode. Today's episode is always asked whenever I mention the word prolapse, and it's how do you navigate pregnancy and birth with a prolapse. So I think you're going to love this episode, whether you're pregnant right now, maybe you're not far off having a birth with your prolapse and you're unsure about the things you might need to think about or the factors that you need to consider. Is it going to get worse? What's the best way to deliver this baby? Should I have any more babies? Should I have any more pregnancies? I know this is a common question that comes up. I knew I needed to do a whole episode just on this topic. So that's what today's episode is all about. So I know a lot of people probably want to listen to this episode and go, yeah, Laura's going to tell me this is what I should do or this is what I shouldn't do. It's not black and white. I wish I had a magic 8-ball that could say, if you do this, this is the result, but we don't. And that's the beauty of it, as well as what makes us scared. But today I'm going to present you with the evidence that we know of. Plus I'm going to present you with all the questions I think is worth thinking about when it comes to navigating pregnancy and future births if you do have a prolapse. So I think this is going to be really helpful food for thought for you. And as always with this series, we're going to be hearing from Pregnancy Posse members, sharing their stories. And I think that's going to give you some really good perspectives on what they went and did with their future pregnancies and births. And it'll give you a wide range of experiences as well. There was a whole heap of different responses when it came to their individual stories. So I think that'll be really cool to hear from them as well. And if you are listening to this episode and you are currently pregnant and you have a prolapse and you're wondering how you're going to navigate this journey, I do invite you to come over to the Pregnancy Posse and check it out. We have prolapse-friendly workouts for everyone. We have loads of information on how to manage your prolapse, how to manage your bowels, how to manage incontinence or pelvic floor troubles that you might be having. You can ask me all of your burning questions, and there's a wonderful community of women as well. So I think it would be really great for you to come and join us if you're feeling a bit isolated on your pregnancy journey. You can go and find us at thepregnancyposse.com and you can trial it for 7 days. But without further ado, let's jump into episode 3, chatting all about navigating pregnancy and birth with a prolapse. Enjoy, ladies. Hi, ladies. Okay, like I say, for every episode in this series thus far, this is a hot topic. Exercise and prolapse is what we're going to be talking about today. Again, it's another big fear that seems to come up when women are diagnosed with prolapse or first feel their prolapse, is their head then goes straight to, what does this mean for exercise? Particularly if you are a really active exercise goer or exercise is a really big part of your identity, your routine, your mental health. It's really a legitimate fear that, what does this mean? Will I be able to get back to exercise, or what exercise can I do? It can be a really confusing realm to be thrust into, particularly if you don't have support just yet, if you haven't connected yourself in with a women's health physio, if someone who's really supportive and knowledgeable about prolapse. It can be a really lonely area to navigate. And I don't want you to feel alone. I want you to feel so empowered. And the crux of this episode is that exercise is actually really important. Okay. As I spoke about in episode 2, it is one of the main pillars of treatment for prolapse. So if you're listening to this episode thinking, oh, I thought exercise was like an absolute red flag, no-go zone. If you have prolapse, that means you're not moving, you're on the couch, you're sedentary, you're not exercising at all. False, completely false. It is about finding the right exercise for you, because as I mentioned in episode 2, it is so important that your whole system is strong and conditioned, because if it's not, you're going to feel more symptomatic of your prolapse because you're not sharing the load very well in your body. Your pelvic floor is probably taking more load than is necessary. We need to make sure that we build up our whole system to compensate for where our weak spots are. So it's actually really important you exercise. But there's so many exercises out there that will make your symptoms worse. So let's kick off today's episode with starting with what is safe. Now, again, I'm sorry if I'm the most annoying person in the world because I'm never giving you black and white answers. I will give you some exercises that I do like in a second, but any exercise is safe for your prolapse if whilst you're doing it, you are asymptomatic. And what I mean by that is I mean completely asymptomatic. You shouldn't feel heaviness, dragging, incontinence, lower abdominal discomfort or pain, feeling like there's a bulge in the vagina, feeling like you all of a sudden need to go to the toilet, feeling any sort of lower back pain or discomfort. If you can exercise whilst experiencing none of those symptoms, that's a really great sign. What you also need to monitor is how do you feel in the short term afterwards? So some people will exercise and they'll feel completely fine, but then in the following, day, they may then notice, oh, actually, I feel a bit heavy. Oh, I actually feel like I don't have as much control over my bladder. So let's break it down into flags. If you're getting symptoms whilst you're exercising, red flag, not a great exercise. If you're getting symptoms not while you're exercising, but you are within the day after, that's an orange flag. It doesn't mean that exercise is an absolute naughty, banned no-go. It's something to be cautious of though. And if you're getting absolutely no symptoms whilst you're exercising and absolutely no symptoms after you've done that exercise, that's a green flag. That's a really great exercise for you then, okay? So that's what a safe exercise is for prolapse, that it is not worsening your prolapse symptoms, okay? So if you're going for a walk around the block and you're thinking, but this is nothing, Laura, this is a pathetic little walk, but when you're walking, you're feeling heavy or you're feeling like there's a full tampon sensation in your vagina, I'm sorry, it's not a good exercise for you. And I know I personally had this. I would go for genuinely like a 2-minute walk in the very early days postpartum and I would feel heaviness. And so I knew I was frustrated. Don't get me wrong. I was so frustrated. I was like, it's just a walk. I can't even walk. How pathetic is that? But it is telling you you're not ready for that yet. This is not a good sign. You got to listen to your body. Ignoring your body will not give you anything good in the short term or the long term. It is not I just got to push through sort of mentality. It's not going to help you. So whilst it can be so mega frustrating to feel like you can't do much, you've got to listen to your body. And trust me, there are so many things you will be able to do. It's probably that they're just not even on your radar yet. And I'm going to talk about some generally really safe options for you in a second. But that's how you know an exercise is good for you. Now, what is unsafe? Well, the reverse of that. So anything that makes you symptomatic. Now, I'm going to list a couple of classic red flag exercises. This is not going to work for everyone because some people will be able to do these and they'll actually be fine. But what I find is this kind of covers most of the red flag exercises for my clients that I've seen with prolapse. So again, check in with yourself. Does this sit true for you? Is this correct? It may not be, but for most people I find these tend to aggravate you. And the reason is because they're high impact exercises, so they tend to put a lot of pressure down on the pelvic floor. So things like running or high load abdominal exercises, I'm talking like your sit-ups, your V-ups, your Russian twists, your planks, any sort of plyometric, star jumps, squat jumps, jump lunges, deep squats, or any weights that really make you hold your breath and do that Valsalva to push, pull, whatever it is. Skipping, they tend to be the red flag exercises that if I had to give you a list of things to probably avoid in the early days of prolapse management, it would be those ones. Again, that's not going to suit everyone, but if you're trying to be conservative, don't rock the boat, I would avoid those exercises, okay? Particularly in the early days of your prolapse management. Now, it's all well and good, Laura. Tell me what I can't do, but what can I do? Don't worry, I'm not going to leave you high and dry. I will definitely tell you what I find, again, generally speaking, are good exercises that you can do that don't tend to aggravate most women's prolapses. Again, I don't know how many times I can say this though. make sure you tune in with you, because it's not going to be black and white. It's not going to be that simple that yes, you can do these, no, you can't do those. Tune in with what feels good for you. Now, in terms of what parameters should you work within, again, you want to make sure that you're asymptomatic and your prolapse is not worsening during the exercise and in the short term afterwards. And also keep in mind, if you are pregnant, as all my posse members would know, you need to stay within the huff and puff and temperature guidelines for pregnancy, okay? So, generally speaking, anything low impact is going to be really friendly for your prolapse. So think about your floor-based glute exercise. Now, glute exercises are really good because you want good, strong glutes to help manage prolapse as well, to support your pelvis. So thinking about like and these are all classic posse exercises. We do a lot of these in the first trimester, but bridges, clams, side lie leg lifts, they're all low impact, good glute-based exercises. So generally, they're fantastic for prolapse. Also really good in the early days postpartum, when you're, a couple of weeks postpartum thinking, what can I do? I just want to be able to exercise, but my prolapse feels like it's going to fall out. Fantastic to do. Any sort of water-based exercise that's low impact, so like swimming or hydrotherapy, aqua aerobics, they can be really good options because, again, you're taking a lot of the weight out of it because you're in the water. But again, be careful of any like strong ab moves. I remember doing an aqua class with dumbbells and we're kind of doing like ab crunches in the water, which again, you would think, oh, but that's fine because you're in the water. But there was a lot of core involved in it. So again, just pay attention, see how you're feeling, monitor if you need to. One of my absolute favorite prolapse-friendly and pregnancy-friendly exercises is stationary cycling. So because you're sitting down, so the weight is kind of like absorbed in the seat, and don't get out of the saddle. I recommend you just stay in the saddle. You can really work on your huff and puff. So this is a great one to tick the box of like wanting to get a bit sweaty, wanting to get a bit huffy and puffy and feel like you're really working yourself, but without loading your pelvic floor too much. So stationary cycling is one of my favorites. And any sort of tailored Pilates, yoga, or weights program, preferably made by your women's health physio who has assessed your prolapse and knows exactly what you're capable of. Anything like that is fantastic. So weights, Pilates, any sort of body weight exercises is not a red flag if it's prescribed tailored to you, if it's exactly right for you. So that's where I definitely recommend you go see a women's health physio so you know what you're capable of doing. But there's so much that you can do, and they're just quickly throwing it out there. Some really good examples of things that are prolapse friendly for most women. Now, walking, I mentioned before, but walking in some ways, yes, is low impact, but I'd say it's a real hit and miss with women with prolapse. So with walking, what you'll find is you've got a real parameter on how far and how fast you can walk. So whilst it seems like the easiest exercise in the world, you're still taking the full weight of gravity because you're upright. You're still striking the ground every time you take a step, which can be putting a little bit of pressure on your vulnerable, weak prolapse area. So you might find that you can walk for 10 minutes and that's fine. You might find that if you walk for 15 though, then everything goes south and everything goes downhill and you feel awful. So you're going to have to be really, really particular with how far you walk. I know for me, walking was really aggravating in the early days postpartum. So again, whilst it seems like an exercise that should be easy, it's a real hit and miss. Also keep in mind, from a pure exercise point of view, you're walking as just part of your functional daily life. Walk to the shops, walk to get a coffee. You might need to jiggle your baby around in their carrier to get to sleep, or you're always just walking. It's a functional part. You can't get away with not walking in your everyday life. So if you want to then exercise, you probably need to weigh out, well, how much walking or how many steps have I already taken today? Is it a smart idea to then want to go for a half an hour walk, or would I be best to get on the bike or do some floor-based prolapse-friendly exercises as my way of getting exercise, because I've already been upright a lot of today. I've been cooking, I've been cleaning, I've been doing whatever it is that you do that's already on your feet. Maybe it's not a smart idea to then use walking as exercise. So that's just some food for thought when it comes to walking. Okay, the next part I wanted to address was about pelvic floor exercises because, and again, I kind of touched on this a little bit in episode 2, but a lot of women think, should I only do pelvic floor exercises? So is it all about just sitting on my couch and banging out my Kegels as much as I can? Is that going to be the best thing for my prolapse? And my answer in short is no. And again, I spoke about this in episode 2 a little bit, but your pelvic floor, yes, is very important to prolapse management. It is the hammock underneath those organs that are sitting a little bit lower, that are a bit heavy. It is the support bra underneath that helps to lift and support all your pelvic organs. It's a fantastic muscle to be working. We absolutely want to be making sure we have a good, healthy, strong, functioning pelvic floor. But if our pelvic floor is the only thing we're exercising, that means the rest of our body is not getting stronger, more conditioned, more functional. We're not optimizing our biomechanics. And that share the load concept comes back into it, because if we're then bending down to the floor, if your quads are rubbish, if your glutes are rubbish, doesn't matter how strong your pelvic floor is, it's going to be taking so much more load than necessary if the rest of your body is weak. So no, you should be doing pelvic floor in combination with general strength and conditioning exercises like the ones I just mentioned before. But again, go see your women's health physio. They'll be able to tell you exactly where you're at in terms of the other exercises you can be doing. Rarely, I'm trying to think of any examples, but rarely do I ever get a woman only ever doing pelvic floor exercises with a prolapse. So maybe for the first session, I might just focus in on pelvic floor because there's so much we need to improve there. And you don't want to bombard someone with, okay, you've got to do this, a million and one things, particularly if you're a new mum. You don't want to overwhelm someone with options. But I would rarely, for a continuous amount of time, get a client to only do pelvic floor exercises. It would always be in combination with a small home exercise program to strengthen the rest of their body. So short answer is no, it's not just about pelvic floor. Now, the next thing I wanted to address, because these are the two main ones that come up, is will I ever be able to run or lift weights again? So it seems to be running and weightlifting that are like the two main exercises that women fear they will not be able to return back to. So I want to give some hope for some women here. And again, this is not going to apply to everyone. I hate that I keep prefacing it with these, conditions, but I know that some women may find this like too hopeful. Like maybe if you're sitting there listening to this and you've got a prolapse and you haven't been able to return to running, that you might be like, you know what, Laura, stuff you. Look at you just putting all this false hope in women saying, yeah, you'll be able to run again. It's not true, blah, blah, blah. You might be feeling a bit upset about me being so optimistic. That's not what I'm here for. I'm not trying to pretend to be full of hope, but it's just that most women I do see can get back to these exercises in some way, shape, or form. Again, I'm not speaking on behalf of everyone with a prolapse, but I want to give hope to those women who think that this is just a life sentence. It's not for a lot of women. In fact, a majority of women I see can get back to what they love in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to walk you through that spectrum and what I mean by that, because it's not exactly how it looks. It doesn't mean that you'll get back to necessarily exactly what you were doing. There's a whole spectrum, but it also doesn't mean that you'll never get back there. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So think of this spectrum, let's say for running. So there's a spectrum of at one end that you may be able to return to running completely as you were pre-birth, at the same cadence, at the same distance, without symptoms. That's at this end of the spectrum. And that is absolutely a goal that we can aim to achieve. In terms of how long you'll get there, who knows? But that is definitely a goal that a lot of women do get back to. And then next on that spectrum is that you may be able to return to running, but only for a limited amount of time. So maybe you used to run half marathons and now you can only run 5Ks symptom-free. And that's your capacity for running. And that's something that you obviously need to adjust to. Or maybe you'll be able to return to running, but only when you're wearing something like a pessary, some sort of vaginal support device. So maybe you can run a half marathon, again, if that's what you're aiming for, but only when you're wearing a pessary. So that's another version on the spectrum of achieving your goal. Or maybe you can return to running in some capacity, but only at certain times in your cycle when you're asymptomatic. So a lot of women will find they can't run when they're premenstrual because they feel more symptomatic of their prolapse. However, when they're in their ovulation phase, they can run at their full capacity, and that's fantastic. So they just need to base their training or their exercise or their activity cyclically. Or maybe you may not be able to return to running completely symptom-free, and that's on the other end of that spectrum. So maybe you've been doing rehab for a while, and you've done all the right things, you wear the pessary, all of that, but running is just still not agreeing with your body right now. And again, that's a very small minority of women that I work with. But guess what? That's not the end of the world, because what we then do, we go, okay, you know what? This really sucks. And for this small proportion of women, you have tried everything. And unfortunately, running's just not clicking for you right now. So let's sit down and let's analyze. This is exactly what I do with my clients, by the way. What is it that you loved so much about running? Okay, because I don't want this to be, this story that now, haunts you for the rest of your life, because you can still live such a full, fit, active life. It may just not look exactly how you thought it would look. So what is it that you loved about running? So was it the me time? That ability to just leave the house and have some downtime for you. And could you instead maybe lock a time in every week where you do a Pilates class or you do a spin class, or you have like allocated me time that used to be running but is now something else? Or maybe you loved running because of that sweat, that endorphin, that huff and puff adrenaline hit that you get. And I understand that. And maybe you're really missing that hit. So maybe instead you could do a spin class or go for a really high intensity bike ride up a hill, or do some sprints on the bike to get those same results but without the impact on the pelvis. So you could get your huff and puff up, you could get your sweat on, but on a bike instead. Or maybe you really love the competitive side of running, or the social side of it, or the fresh air outdoors, whatever it is. Can you see how we could take that thing that you loved about running and find another vehicle of exercise to achieve that? So I hope that helps to make sense of how can we take from running what we really loved if we can't get back there? Because remember that spectrum. There's a lot of women that can get back there in some capacity. But if you happen to be in this small minority of women who aren't able to get back there, or maybe not in the time frame that you're after, maybe along the journey of getting back there, you really need something else to scratch that itch. What is the itch we're trying to scratch? And what other vehicle of exercise can we use to scratch that itch? So that's the method I walk my clients through. And I think it's a really good prompting for what am I trying to get out of it, okay? Same goes for weightlifting. So trying to really pull apart what is it we're trying to achieve from weightlifting, and along that spectrum, where do we sit on what do we need to do or modify to be able to return to it in some capacity. Exactly the same spectrum and methodology applies for weightlifting. Now, also keep in mind, rehab is so varied, so unique, so individual. So some may return to these activities after 3 months of rehab, and others it may take years. So my message here is really be kind to yourself in the process. No two women will have the same journey. So do not compare yourself to a false timeline to the woman sitting next to you with the, quote unquote, exact same prolapse, because everyone is very unique. So again, I've worked with women for years, and after years they get back to their goals, and it does take a lot of time, a lot of effort, but they do get there. It just takes longer. And for some women, again, they can just do a couple of pelvic floor quick flicks and off they go. They seem to be fine. Everyone is so unique. So again, be compassionate to yourself, be kind to yourself. And in the meantime, yes, you can absolutely exercise. It's just about finding the right exercise for you. So I want this to give you hope for all those women who are thinking that exercise is now off the cards because they have a prolapse. It couldn't be further from the truth. So I hope that is uplifting for you if you are feeling like that's a worry of yours. Okay, ladies, we are now going to hear some very special and vulnerable stories from my wonderful Pregnancy Posse members who went on after prolapse to have more pregnancies and more births. And I think it's going to be really special to be able to hear from these women. They have picked a variety of different options. They had a variety of different experiences. Some went on to have vaginal births, some went on to have C-sections. I think it gives you a really good broad perspective on what other women have been through and experienced, and it may help you on your journey. I hope at least. So enjoy.
So I have just had my second baby. He's 7 months old now. And yeah, it was great. Basically, throughout the whole pregnancy, I wore my pessary every day instead of just when I was exercising, just to have that extra support. I think I sort of started doing that maybe about halfway through. And it didn't really get much worse at all. It was expected to get a little bit worse, but the place where it was after having my second baby wasn't as bad as it was after the first time. So yeah, I had a really, really good birth, and it was really just great. So yeah, it was something I was quite worried about, and yeah, it was fantastic.
I've now had my second child, a little girl. There was an 18-month gap between my son and my daughter. She's now 15 months old. I was able to carry her full term, 40 plus 4 weeks. I had her vaginally again. We had no problems with my prolapse, even though I went back to my women's health physio throughout my pregnancy. From about 6 months of my pregnancy, I saw her on a regular basis just to monitor and be a bit more proactive with my care and management just in case. It probably helped that my daughter wasn't as heavy as my son. My son was 4.1 kilos. My daughter was only 3.8. So the pressure on my pelvic floor was much less, but also my labor was so much easier the second time round. You know, for my son, I was pushing for almost an hour. He was in a really awkward position because of how big he was. It was just a really stressful kind of labor. But with my daughter, it was so quick, you know, like I only pushed twice and she was out. So there was not as much pressure on my pelvic floor in terms of carrying her or laboring her. So when I was going through my recovery, I recovered so much quicker. Only probably a couple of months max was I with my women's health physio, and there was not even really a prolapse. It was just weakness that we managed. So there is absolutely positive stories about going on to have other babies, which I was so worried about, but it was really successful for me.
I've since given birth, and I agonized basically the whole pregnancy about what the right avenue was for me to take. I ended up also getting a pelvic floor ultrasound, which determined that I had torn the muscle off the bone on one side of my pelvic floor, and the other side had a tear through it. And so that sort of information, I guess, led me to make the decision that I just wasn't willing to lose both sides. Again, like, there's no right or wrong. I made that decision, and I felt comfortable with that decision. Throughout the pregnancy, I was symptom-free, and yeah, it didn't really affect me throughout the pregnancy at all, aside from me agonizing about whether to attempt another vaginal birth or whether to go for the C-section.
I did go on to have another pregnancy, but I had an elective C-section, so I just couldn't bring myself to mentally prepare for the pushing phase, as I'd come so far from where I had been initially after my diagnosis emotionally, so just didn't want to risk putting myself back there at all.
So I'm 25 weeks pregnant with my second baby, and all going well so far. I haven't had any symptoms of prolapse re-emerge yet. Unfortunately for me, due to other complications in my first birth, I won't be attempting a vaginal birth this time around, and it will be a C-section.
I'm 20 weeks pregnant, and having this third bubba, it is making me feel a little bit nervous about what that delivery might mean. I'm very keen to not have a cesarean delivery, and speaking with the obstetrician, I'm thinking if this baby is on track to be a big bubba, we might decide for an early induction, probably trying to avoid that, like an excessively big bubba, just to try and reduce or minimize any damage of prolapse with this third delivery. I also had a 3rd degree tear in that second delivery.
Hi, ladies. I hope you love this episode. As always, I really hope you love the stories as well from the Pregnancy Posse members sharing their experience of navigating pregnancy and birth with a prolapse. And I would love to hear from you over on my socials at PhysioLaura. I think it would be really cool if you could share, if you felt inclined to, share your story about pregnancy or about birth with a prolapse. Let me know how it went. Comment on my post for this podcast, or send me a DM if you want to explain a little bit more detail, because I would love to be able to share these with my audience as well. Because again, I think it's this thing where people feel so alone, even though we know it's so common. Women feel so alone in their experience of navigating future pregnancies and births with a prolapse, and they'd love to hear from you, I'm sure. So if you feel inclined to come and chat to me about it, I would love to hear from you. Come on over to @PhysioLaura and let me know what your experience with this has been, and if you feel inclined to share, and I would love to share it with my audience too. I think it would be a great way to build up some community where women don't feel like they're the only ones navigating this right now. And again, whilst I said in this episode, I don't have a magic 8-ball where I can say, if you do this, that's the result. And I can't share with you, well, if Jane did this was her result. Well, therefore, the same thing's going to happen to you. But I think there is something for knowing other women have walked a similar path to you before anyway. So definitely come on over, say hello. I love hearing from you, knowing that you're listening to this podcast, and I'd love to know where you're listening to it. I love to know all the things about you and this podcast experience. So please come on over and say hello and share with me, and make sure you subscribe to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast, because we still have 2 amazing episodes left in this series that are going to be dropping over the next couple of weeks. So you don't want to miss out. Definitely subscribe. And if you want to watch this whole series all at once, plus see the bonus video that I did for this prolapse series, where I get my whiteboard out and I share with you the ins and outs of exactly what a prolapse looks like, where a pessary sits, how the pelvic floor helps in a prolapse, what the front walls and the back walls of the vagina are doing, and so much more. It's a really good description of prolapse on the whiteboard, really diagrammatical. It helps women it clicks into place what a prolapse is doing. Anyway, that's the bonus video. If you want to check out this whole series plus the bonus video, plus all our amazing prolapse-friendly workouts, pregnancy-friendly workouts, a beautiful community of women, you know the drill, thepregnancyposse.com. Come and chat with me over at the Pregnancy Posse. You can trial it for 7 days. I would love to see you in there. Otherwise, stay tuned for our upcoming episodes that will be dropping next week, and we will be talking all about exercise with a prolapse, which again, another hot topic. I know you want to know all about this, and we cover all bases, so definitely stay tuned for that. Otherwise, wherever you are in the world right now, I hope you are having a wonderful day. You're being kind to yourself, you are looking after yourself, and you are feeling good. I'll chat to you all then. Bye.